Good morning. Welcome back. 2018 marks a new chapter for the Seattle Police Department. For years, SPD has been trying to change its ways following a federal investigation into use of force and accusations of bias policing. Now the department finally has a chance to move forward after a federal judge said SPD has basically done everything asked of them. It's an opportunity not to forget the mistakes of the past, but to learn from them and move on. And of course, who leads the department during this time is going to have a lot to do with whether officers are successful. So joining us this morning in studio is Interim Chief of Police Carmen. We appreciate you being here. Not your first visit. So you're the Interim Chief of Police, but I feel like we have to get this out of the way. I know you want the job. I know you're applying for the job. You certainly don't have to do that interview with me, but since you're here, why are you good for the job?
Well, Brandy, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. I'm very excited to be here. You know, I've been with the police department for 26 years. It's such an honorable profession. I love the organization, the agency. I've come up through the ranks, got the opportunity to work with a great chief and Chief O'Toole, who really set the tone for these last 3.5 years, where we've worked side by side, hip by hip, pushing the department through on reforms. And now I'm ready to continue that effort into the future. So I feel more than prepared to do the job and ready to apply and take on that challenge.
Well, maybe your first test is to get some difficult questions from the press, because I think there's some residents in Lake City who have some anger towards the Seattle Police Department this morning. As we've been saying throughout the morning, there was a horrible homicide in Lake City on Monday, a random, brutal murder. There was some frustration from residents because throughout the day, they would ask police officers and they would get very little information about what was going on, about was this a murder, is there a suspect at large. Some of them were worried about their kids. Should the police department have been more forthcoming with the press and with the public about the nature of what was happening in that neighborhood on that day?
Well, Brandy, I want to say that I absolutely believe in transparency and giving out as much information as possible to the public, especially for their safety. It's really important. So in this situation, we probably could have given a little bit more information out earlier, but I will say that the minute we had enough detail to put out, we did, and we actually sent officers into the area, not once but twice, to give the community members some information about what had occurred, the fact that we had our sole suspect in custody so they could have a sense of relief, and also give them some tips just for their own sense of protection in the neighborhood, because obviously there's a lot of concern when a random act like this occurs. Very rare that it would occur, but since it did, we wanted to make sure that we reached out to the community on it. Yeah,
and I, just encourage, when you've got something that was clearly a homicide, the second officers walked in that door, they knew what they were dealing with. I'm not going to say all the grisly details, but that information is made public as soon as possible in every case. That would be, I'm always open for transparency. I want to ask you about something else that's in the news. I saw you in the crowd yesterday at the memorial for Deputy Daniel McCartney in Pierce County. You are now in charge of hundreds of police officers. When you see something like that, your officers go out every day and they do dangerous jobs. It's the reality of what they've signed up for.
Absolutely.
Do you have a more intense feeling of responsibility for those officers now that you're in charge of the department?
Absolutely. I've always felt responsible for officers and making sure. I mean, I was second in command for 3.5 years, so it's always been a part of my duty and actually in my DNA to really care about the officers and the community that we serve. And certainly when something like this happens, it brings us all together to really, focus on how important our job is, how dangerous it potentially can be, and it also is a chance for the community and officers to come together and remember how important the work is.
Something that's been brought up in Pierce County as a concern is that they're understaffed. That's just the reality of the situation. Backup can be minutes away. SPD is also technically understaffed for a city of our size. We are lacking officers for a variety of reasons. Do you think that your officers have enough staffing to be able to go out and do their jobs safely and protect the community?
I think that I would love to see more staffing, of course,
everyone would,
but
right?
but we have to prioritize and make sure that we have enough officers to answer the calls. I can tell you on our priority calls, the really important in-progress calls, we have one of the fastest response time in the nation, under 6 minutes or around 6 minutes. So we're doing well in that area, but we absolutely would love to have more staffing. We're in a really competitive area here. Seattle has lots of jobs, highly educated folks, so we're really competing to make sure that we can get people in the door and staff, but we're not going to reduce our standards in any way to get folks in. We have to have top quality officers, care about the community, reflect the community that we serve. So we're working really hard to do that.
The hiring process is difficult. I know you know I probably went through the process for
That's
a story,
right,
not because
remember.
I don't love my job. And I didn't make it. I didn't have what it took. So I see that. Future of policing, big step for SPD in getting through at least the initial reform process.
Sure.
Having been with the department for so long, do you think SPD is reformed?
Absolutely. I think it's an iterative process, though. It's not like you reform on Tuesday and you're done. I mean, this means
7 years of reform.
Yeah. So what this means is that we've met the requirements that were set out, but we're going to continue to evolve, evaluate, do that critical self-analysis to make sure that the department is meeting the needs and is looking forward and doing modern-day policing. We don't want to become stagnant and say it's over and done, because it's not. It's going to be an iterative process, and I feel like with Chief O'Toole and myself, we've worked really hard to set the basis in place for us to really work and continue that process. And we're always evolving and looking to improve.
So if you get this job permanently, that's a big responsibility. I know that you know that, or you wouldn't be asking for it. Let me ask an awkward question. So over the years, you've risen up pretty quickly through the ranks. Over the years, because of that, I've had an opportunity to talk about you behind your back with other people in the department.
Oh, great.
That's what happens when you're at the top. What do you think they had to say about you when I asked them what they thought about you rising up so quickly?
Well, this is what I think people would say about me who work with me, that I'm an extremely hard worker. I don't think anybody I've worked for, worked with, or who's worked for me would tell you that I have anything but the highest ethic and work, and that I care about the community and that I care about the officers that serve the department. I believe anybody who knows me would say that.
Here's what's interesting about those conversations that I've had, and some of them very recent. Seattle likes to do things a lot of the times because of how they look, because of the political climate. We can't ignore that you are black, that you're a woman, that you have very close ties with the community. All of those things would seem to check some boxes for the city about what it needs or wants in a police chief at this time. I thought that a lot of the officers who I spoke to, some of whom you have passed up along your way, would point to some of those things as a reason for it. And not a single one of them did. And it's not up to me whether you get this job. I have no dog in the fight, but what I'll say is what that tells me is they believe two things. They believe that you're competent, which is the baseline for any job that anyone should have, is competence before any of those other markers. And they all said that you're working around the clock. So I think it's important for me having these conversations behind your back to relate to you that the things that you would hope that your colleagues say about you are the things that they have said to me about you as well. So whether you get the job or not, I will tell you we have high expectations for the next police chief. Seattle needs a good police chief, someone who's going to work with us in the press, work with the communities. So if you get that job, know that we are going to hold you to a very high standard.
I expect my feet to be held to the fire, but you know what? I'm up for the job, Brandy.
All right.
I'm ready to go.
Interim Police Chief Carmen Best, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.